Hell Hath No Fury by Eve Elliott. First published by Malice Domestic in their anthology Murder Most Traditional. Millionaire playboy Julian Davenport sets sail with new bride. 2 months after his scandalous divorce from actress Imogen Carter, the dashing heir to the Davenport mining fortune has taken their new bride in the person of Angeline Sutton, 18-year-old daughter of industrial tycoon Hiram Sutton. The glorious newlyweds have embarked on a sailing honeymoon to the south of France aboard a 300-foot luxury yacht, the Erinyes, a wedding present from the bride's father. Rumour has it that the sailing party includes several associates of Mr. Davenport. Among them, astonishingly, are Miss Carter and her new husband, Dr. Arthur Chenoweth. Society Eye column, London Gazette, 12th August 1938. You're quite a curious fellow, Dr. Chenoweth. The man seated to my left, a Mr. Perry, according to the place card before him, leaned in to whisper as we seated ourselves at the lavish dining table aboard Julian Davenport's floating palace. White-gloved staff poured wine as the rest of the party took their seats, including the newlyweds themselves. Only one guest was missing, and I felt her absence keenly. "How so?" I asked, without much interest. "Well, I shouldn't like to be on honeymoon with my wife's former husband and his new wife," he returned. "I wonder what possessed Davenport to invite her along." "He didn't," I said. "It was her idea." My companion laughed. "These young women today, they certainly know their own minds. My hat's off to you, then, for being a jolly good sport about it." "I'd do anything for her," I said, because it was true. "What about Davenport, though?" he chuckled. "After such a vicious divorce, I wonder he doesn't fear for his life. Hell hath no fury, etc. It's a wonder he even allowed her to set foot on board." "She's the more famous of them," I shrugged. "He knows how to attract press attention when he wants it." "You know, I'm rather reminded of that new Christie book. What is it, Death on the Nile? That's it. Ripping good read. A woman scorned and all that. Although," he paused, his amusement growing, "she'd be a fool to exact her revenge on Davenport with Chief Inspector Thorpe aboard as well." My eyes went to Thorpe, who was accepting a glass of Burgundy from one of the staff. Florid, rotund, sitting back against his chair like Alexander surveying Palestine. Insufferable man. I'd always detested him as the head of Scotland Yard, for he often publicly insulted the psychiatric profession whenever there were newspaper fellows about, and my animosity had only grown since his retirement. He was Davenport's uncle, and now penned ghastly detective novels, the culprits in which were invariably the mentally ill. Who else had joined this unorthodox honeymoon? My eyes scanned the table, recognizing only a few faces. Eustace Grant, a medical man I knew slightly, was now Davenport's personal physician. Anthony Fraser, now there was an eye-raiser. He was an enormous, hulking young fellow, and the son of a shipping tycoon Davenport had allegedly ruined. Marjorie Hunt, a gossip columnist, whom Davenport had successfully sued, made another startling addition to the entourage. And, of course, my absent wife, perhaps the most surprising guest of all. A substantial matron took the empty chair to my right, having found the place card with the name Mrs. Williams. I had rather hoped to be seated with my wife, but I saw immediately that doing so would have been to her disadvantage. Clearly, her place was directly opposite Davenport and his new bride. I remained content to anchor the end of the table with my gregarious new acquaintance and the portly dowager to my right. And then, as if an angel had alit on earth, my eyes caught the only sight I ever cared to see. My wife, Imogen, had entered the dining saloon. She was startlingly beautiful, so lithe and elegant, such lustrous skin, such glittering dark eyes and shining ebony hair. She'd triumphed as Cleopatra in Drury Lane last year, and had inhabited the role so thoroughly she'd collapsed from exhaustion on closing night. She was exquisite and alluring, and, like the more famous Cleopatra, utterly irresistible. All eyes were drawn to her as she entered the saloon. She gifted her smile to several of Davenport's guests, touching their shoulders with her slender fingers before gliding to her seat. Her smile was all beneficence and grace, and my heart thumped pitifully just watching her. "Shame she had all that trouble," Perry said, sotto voce. "What a beauty." Imogen slid gracefully into her seat and accepted a glass of wine. She downed it quickly and held the darkly stained glass aloft to be refilled. The startled server hesitated only a moment before pouring her another, spurred to action by her upturned face and brilliant smile. The wine had tinted her lips a dark, lurid red, which suited her complexion beautifully. Oh, she was a magnificent creature, holding her head high, daring anyone to pity her, flashing her radiant smile and narrowing her onyx eyes across the table at her ex-husband as she swirled wine around her glass in slow, mesmerizing circles. Davenport, still dashing at nearly 50, still debonair with his slicked-back hair and his elegant moustache, still trim and broad-shouldered beneath his pristine white dinner jacket, studiously avoided her gaze. "I propose a toast to our gracious hosts," she said then, her voice so rich and sultry it stilled the room. All conversation stopped as she raised her glass towards Davenport, who sat back and regarded her with a cautious expression. "Here's to Mr. and Mrs. Davenport. The second Mrs. Davenport, that is." The pale and lovely Angeline blushed a furious pink and looked down. "Hear, hear," voices around the table chimed in, although in somewhat muted tones. "May you find happiness with this woman for many months to come, until you find someone else to take her place." "Imogen." Julian Davenport's handsome face was frowning now, flashing a warning at his former wife. "Now, darling," she cooed, "let's not pretend this marriage will last any longer than ours did." Who could help but fall in love with that mellifluous voice? What a fool Davenport had been to break his marriage vows to such a woman. "I say, Miss Carter, I beg your pardon, Mrs. Chenoweth," Thorpe said gruffly. "Let's enjoy this magnificent meal, shall we? Let bygones be bygones, as it were." Murmurs of agreement swept the table. "He will leave you, you know." Imogen turned her attention to Angeline. "He will tire of you and seek out other women. You must know this." "Imogen, that's quite enough," Davenport said. "You promised me you were fully recovered from your breakdown." I mentally filled in the word for him. "The nervous collapse you caused when your scandalous affair and plans to divorce her were publicly revealed. From your difficulties," Davenport went on, "and I hope it's the truth." "The truth?" she echoed, ending on a tinkling laugh. "Who are you to speak of promises and truth?" The tension around the table grew. Imogen glanced around at the perturbed faces and addressed them. "You know he only married this little tramp because she's pregnant, don't you?" She blinked her long eyelashes. "Otherwise he'd have tossed her away by now, like he does with all his women." "Imogen!" Davenport barked. It was perhaps the only time I'd ever seen the sophisticate tremble with anger.
"I told you it would be dreadful having her here,"
Angeline erupted then, her thin, girlish voice breaking.
"Oh, Julian, she's vile and vicious and utterly insane. You said so yourself."
I'd rarely seen a more delightful tableau than the one before me. The mighty Davenport, caught between his furious wives, publicly embarrassed by the women he thought he could abuse with impunity. He tried to placate his new wife, all the while glaring back at his former wife with barely contained rage. "Pull yourself together, Angie," he was saying, though she shook her head and began to cry.
"Everyone will know soon enough, dear,"
Imogen said with an elegant shrug. "Why, you're already showing." "Ladies and gentlemen," Davenport lifted his chin and addressed the room, the very picture of dignity. "Do please excuse us. I should like to speak with Mrs. Chenoweth privately."
"No!"
The voice was Imogen's, but the ferocity in it was like nothing I'd heard before. All eyes stared at her as she rose and planted both hands on the table with a defiant bang that made the tableware rattle. "I beg your pardon?" Davenport challenged her, rising as well. The former spouses stared at each other, eyes glittering with animosity. "You can't hide from this," she lashed out. "I will see that the world knows what a filthy cheat you are." "You're insane," he growled. "They never should have let you out of that asylum you belong in." "You won't silence me, I tell you." She looked around the table at the stricken faces. "He wanted to bring another woman into our bed. Did you know that? More than 1, 2, 3, as many as he could. He wanted to have an orgy, and enough of this nonsense." Davenport straightened up. "You're clearly—" A wail broke through Davenport's words, and everyone turned to Angeline, who was now red-faced and weeping. She pushed back her chair, threw down the napkin she'd been twisting, and fled from the table, nearly crashing into a bewildered waiter. "Angeline, wait!" Davenport called out. Casting a vicious glance at Imogen, he turned and followed his new wife, his plaintive calls echoing down the narrow corridors towards the back of the yacht. When I turned to look at Imogen, her eyes were dancing. Dinner was a subdued affair, and the only conversation to be had was delivered in hushed tones. Each new subject was extinguished quickly, presumably because no one wished to be too loud or too gay. A little after 10, Imogen rose smoothly from her chair. "This is simply too boring. Good night." "Shall I join you, dearest?" I half rose from my own chair. But she was beyond hearing me. All eyes silently watched her retreating back, lushly sinuous in her deep-cut, backless gown. As the silence around the table grew ever more uncomfortable, I cleared my throat and finished the last of my wine. "If you'll excuse me, I shall join my wife." I doubt anyone was anything but relieved to see me go. I passed through the saloon and down the narrow corridor towards the berths, and paused before the polished, burled oak door to Imogen's cabin. I lingered there, touching the cool surface for a moment, hesitating, before turning to enter my own cabin directly opposite. At 3 a.m., I was startled awake by a scream. I threw on my dressing gown and hurried to Davenport's cabin, which I had determined to be the source of the scream. Presently I was joined by several of the other gentlemen, hastily attired in pyjamas and dressing gowns, crowding the corridor outside his door. Even Marjorie Hunt arrived, her hair pinned up in curlers, her face a greenish mask of night cream. "Make way, let me through," I commanded, with the full authority of my medical degree. Bodies jostled and flattened against the panelling as I prized my way into the master cabin. The sight before me was gruesome. Julian Davenport, still dressed for dinner, lay face up on the bed, a knife protruding from the dark red stain in the centre of his chest. Kneeling on the bed beside him, his new wife Angeline was wailing, clutching his cold hand in both of hers. My heart went out to the poor child. I wished I could say something to soothe her, but instead I dutifully examined the body and checked for a pulse. Finding none, I straightened up and shook my head. "Miss Hunt, would you be kind enough to take Mrs. Davenport to the galley and have the cook give her some brandy?"
"Yes, come with me, dear,"
Marjorie Hunt said, guiding the weeping girl off the bed.
"You've had a terrible shock."
"What happened?" Perry appeared, looking dishevelled and confused.
"Someone killed him,"
Angelique cried, as Marjorie led her from the room.
"I came in and found him like this. Oh, my poor Julian."
"I say, Chenoweth, what should we do?" This was Fraser, looking ashen. "Someone has gone to rouse Dr. Grant, but what can be done?" "We must return to England, of course," I said. "You there," I pointed at Perry. "Advise the captain that we must reverse course immediately. Where is Inspector Thorpe? Has anyone woken—"
"Here I am, Chenoweth,"
came the gruffly, sleepy voice of the man himself, who pushed his bulk into the room, tying the belt of his dressing gown about his belly.
"What the devil is—"
He broke off when he saw his nephew's body, and his face paled. "Lord have mercy," he breathed. "Inspector, I'm afraid this situation calls for your expertise. With your permission, I'll place a ship-to-shore call to the police in Cornwall as soon as we're in range. I know the inspector there quite well. He's a good chap.
In the meantime, I suggest you secure this room and start questioning everyone on board."
"Yes, of course," he mumbled, his stare fixed on Davenport. Just then a piercing shriek shattered our nerves anew, only this time it did not belong to Angeline. "Imogen!" I cried, and tore from the room. "Dear God, what is happening on this boat?" Perry exclaimed, and he and Fraser followed me down the corridor. My heart pounding, scarcely able to draw breath, I stopped at Imogen's door and tried the handle. It was locked, but I kept rattling it, uselessly. Her shrieking sobs assailed us from within, and I slammed my impotent fists against the door in an agony of desperation to get inside. "Mrs. Chenoweth!" Fraser called out. "Open the door!" "Break it down, man!" I cried, and the brute obliged, flinging himself against the door again and again until the latch broke, and we three tumbled in. I scanned the room, frantic, but it appeared untouched. Not even the coverlet on the small bed had been disturbed. "Imogen, my love, where are you?" A whimper from the tiny closet beside the door mobilized us, and in seconds the sliding door was thrown aside, and I sank to my knees, felled by the sight of my beautiful wife cowering in the depths. Her knees were drawn up to her chin, her eyes were wide with terror. "There now, my love," I cooed, smoothing her wayward hair out of her eyes. She was slick with sweat and shaking, frail as a leaf. "It's all right, darling, I'm here." It was then that I noticed the spray of dried blood spattered across her dressing gown. All three of us noticed it. Her wild eyes darted between Fraser and Parry, and when her gaze met mine, she opened her mouth and screamed. By 8 a.m., as the yacht motored smoothly towards Cornwall, a sullen gloom had fallen over the sailing party. The staff offered to serve breakfast, but no one had the appetite for it. We gathered forlornly in the ship's lounge to await we knew not what. I paced before the great glass panes that overlooked the bow until commotion from the outer hallway made all heads turn towards the door. Inspector Thorpe entered, followed by Dr. Grant, who guided Imogen delicately toward a narrow bench by the door. Imogen blinked, uncomprehending, until Grant helped her take a seat. The dreadful events of only a few hours ago immediately returned to me in full force. I had allowed myself to be pushed aside by Thorpe and Grant when they had followed Imogen's scream and crowded into her cabin. I had become overcome with emotion I am not proud to admit, and hadn't the wherewithal to assert my authority in the matter, due to Imogen's violent reaction to my presence. Shocked by the intensity of her distress, I had performed only a cursory examination to determine that the blood was not her own, and then allowed Mrs. Williams to bustle me and the other gentlemen out of the room. I'd passed a few dreadful hours not knowing what was taking place behind my wife's closed cabin door. Seeing her now, in a clean shift and a dressing gown that were both too large for her, and likely the property of Mrs. Williams, I felt my stomach lurch with the tenderest love and concern. Imogen looked frail and vulnerable, swathed in those yards of white cotton, with that look of a startled doe upon her beautiful face. I made a move to go to her, but upon seeing my advance she began to fret, her agitation so wretched it stopped me short. "Perhaps you ought to leave off, Doctor," Grant said to me discreetly. "She's calm now. Let's not disturb her. Don't you agree?" I could only nod, a lump in my throat preventing speech. She looked so childlike and confused, so much like she had after her exhausting run as the Egyptian queen. I had been able to care for her then, but now I was utterly useless. At length, everyone who had been witness to the evening's misadventure arrived in the saloon, all wearing grim expressions. Everyone took a seat and looked to Thorpe for what to expect next. Thorpe stood in the centre of the room and cleared his throat. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. No doubt you are anxious for further details of last night's incident."
"How is Mrs. Davenport?" asked Mrs. Williams. "She was in a frightful state."
"Mrs. Davenport is resting in her cabin," Thorpe said, with avuncular reassurance. He tipped his chin at Grant. "Dr. Grant has been tending to her since the event." "Do we know what happened?" Fraser's voice cut through the murmurs. "And do we know who?" "Yes, I'm afraid so. As many of you saw, my nephew was—" Thorpe paused to clear his throat.
stabbed through the heart with a knife from the galley. He would have died almost immediately, according to Dr. Grant. I did not take offence at Thorpe's reliance on Grant over myself. Knowing Thorpe's distaste for my profession, I was not surprised at being excluded. "The captain has reversed course, and we are now roughly 2 hours from Penzance," Thorpe said, consulting his watch. He looked up and gestured to me. "Dr. Chenoweth, being a native of those parts, was good enough to contact the local constabulary via ship-to-shore radio and assures me that the police officers will meet us as soon as we drop anchor." "Why did you let him make the call?" Perry asked. "I say, given the circumstances, wouldn't it have been wiser to contact your own colleagues, Inspector Thorpe?" Thorpe cleared his throat again. "Yes, well, the Davenport family would appreciate discretion in these terrible circumstances. I discussed it with the captain, Dr. Grant, and Mrs. Davenport, and it was agreed that we should return to England with as little unwanted attention as possible. Dr. Chenoweth's personal connection in Penzance affords us a more discreet arrival than we might have enjoyed otherwise." Everyone turned to me, and I smiled weakly. I was able to reach the chief inspector and advised him we would be returning with Mr. Davenport's body. He assures us the press won't be alerted. The captain heard the entire conversation, if you doubt my veracity. Thorpe nodded. "Very good, thank you, Doctor. I assume you also communicated instructions regarding—" He trailed off with a subtle flick of his head towards Imogen. "Regarding what?" His bushy eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Chenoweth, of course. In her current state, and given the violence of her outbursts, I suggest she be placed under arrest discreetly, before arranging for the removal of my nephew's remains." "Under arrest?" I sputtered. "What the devil do you mean?" "I informed the police of the murder, yes, but I requested an escort for her to St. Lawrence's Asylum in Bodmin, where she can receive the care she needs. I said nothing to them of her being involved in his death. That's preposterous." Thorpe rocked back on his heels and sighed, looking about the room for confirmation of support in what he was about to say. Evidently finding it, he came towards me with slow, purposeful steps, folding his hands behind his back. "Doctor, I am not alone in the belief that the crime was indeed committed by your wife. In light of the bloodstains on her—" "Don't be absurd," I cried. "Isn't it obvious what happened? Imogen must have come upon him before Mrs. Davenport did, saw that he had been stabbed, and bloodied her gown whilst leaning over him to try to rouse him." "Really, Dr. Chenoweth,
You saw her in the cabin," I challenged. "She was virtually catatonic. Fraser, Perry, you were with me when we discovered her."
I appealed to them, but they looked away. I returned to Thorpe.
"She was out of her senses with shock. If she'd had the presence of mind to murder the man, she wouldn't have then run to the closet to have a mental collapse."
"I rather think that's exactly what happened," Thorpe said.
"Nonsense. You're making a mistake, Inspector, and I urge you to rethink your conclusions. There is a murderer loose on board, and you're content to lay the blame on an innocent woman, one who clearly lacks the capacity to even understand what has happened. Who among us do you believe is a murderer, then?"
This time it was Marjorie Hunt, glaring at me from her perch beside Perry.
"You, for instance,"
I said desperately, gratified by the shock that lit her face as I pointed at her. "Davenport sued you for libel. He ruined your career at the London Gazette. Why should you not be considered suspect?"
"Because he invited me aboard to discuss writing his autobiography, you fool," Marjorie snapped. "He wanted us to forget the past and collaborate. He said he adored my writing."
I pivoted and faced Fraser.
"What about you? He ruined your father. We all know that. You could have been planning your revenge for years."
Fraser laughed bitterly. "Revenge? Hardly. My father had no head for business. He didn't need any help from Davenport to run the firm into the ground. And as for me, I was invited aboard to meet Mrs. Davenport and discuss a business opportunity involving her husband and her father." My heart began to pound. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead. I was the centre of attention, and what I said next could mean everything to Imogen. "Anyone on this ship could have done it," I said, my tone controlled and quiet. "Mrs. Davenport, for example. She was discovered with the body, covered in blood. She had been so angry with him at dinner, we all saw it.
Perhaps they'd continued to fight, and in a passion she stabbed him. Mrs. Chenoweth was also angry with him at dinner, Mrs. Williams put in. Nods of agreement and murmurs circled the room. Mrs. Davenport was with me all evening, and Dr. Grant. Marjorie Hunt lifted her chin imperiously. I was consoling the poor child. She was in such a state after your wife's outrageous display. It could have been any member of the staff, I said, hearing my own voice falter. It could have been you, Inspector Thorpe, or me, for that matter. You simply can't assume I killed him. The whispered voice cut through my words. I turned to stare at the speaker. She was looking down, hiding her luminous dark eyes. Imogen, no! I crossed the room and dropped to my knees in front of her, searching her face. She seemed less afraid of me now, and only blinked at me with dull eyes. I killed him, I admit it. What have you done to her? I demanded, surging to my feet again to face Grant. Why was I not allowed to see her last night? What did you give her, a barbiturate? She was given nothing, Doctor. I whirled back to Imogen. My darling, listen to me. You don't know what you're saying. You've had another break, like last time. Do you remember? After you played Cleopatra? You're not well, my love, but I will take care of you, I promise. I fell to my knees again. Only don't admit to this terrible thing. You don't know what you're saying. But I do. She reached out and caressed my face with her hand. I closed my eyes to savour the sensation of her hand against my cheek. He betrayed me, and then threw me away. He deserved to die, and so I killed him. Imogen, I said, as tears spilled down my cheeks. Her eyes grew wary then, and her beautiful features contorted into a glower. She lifted her hand and slapped me viciously. Get away from me, Julian, she howled. You can't be here. I killed you. I killed you. She began to strike me then, shrieking and screaming, arms flailing as I took the blows and tried to calm her. Thorpe and Fraser were there immediately, restraining her. I sat back on my haunches, helpless, as Grant approached and deftly slid a hypodermic needle into her arm. She crumpled at once, her long eyelashes fluttering closed. The Irenes dropped anchor off the south pier of the sheltered harbour at Penzance 2 hours later. A small craft was lowered from the outer decks, and being that only Grant, Thorpe and myself and Imogen were going ashore, it was discreet enough not to draw curious eyes away from the behemoth that was the yacht. Thorpe had agreed, after my impassioned pleas, to allow the police to escort Imogen to St. Lawrence's first, before subjecting her to their interrogations. It was a mercy, and I knew it, and my dislike of the man softened somewhat. A sleek black car awaited us at the end of the jetty, emerging from the morning mist as the small craft approached. Inspector Thorpe stepped onto the dock as soon as the vessel was secured, and I followed behind, wearily. 2 gentlemen stepped from the car to greet us, the taller of the 2 shaking Thorpe's hand and introducing himself as Inspector Penrose, sent by the Chief Inspector to assist. Penrose introduced his companion as Constable Evans, and when I was introduced, both men's faces pinched into expressions of sympathy, and they avoided my eyes. Dr. Grant stepped onto the dock then, Imogen beside him. I should have been at her side, would have given anything to be at her side, but it was agreed I should avoid upsetting her delicate mental balance any more than I already had. "Have you arranged for her to be taken to hospital?" I inquired. "The Chief Inspector is a personal friend. He assured me she would be seen by a physician before being interviewed." "Indeed, sir," Penrose said. "They're expecting us at St. Lawrence's." "I should like to come with you," I said, "and to the station, when she is able." "Of course, sir. This way, if you please." Imogen was helped into the back of the car. As Penrose took a seat beside her, she cast a panicked look at us through the window and splayed her fingers against the glass. My darling girl looked absolutely terrified, and my heart nearly broke. I took the front passenger seat, and at length Constable Evans started the engine and pulled away. The dock grew farther and farther away through the rear window, the figures of Grant and Thorpe fading into indistinct swaths of colour in the grey morning mist. I adjusted the rear-view mirror and met Imogen's gaze. There was a tight, uncomfortable silence throughout the car,
as though we were holding our breath, and then, as though we'd all exhaled at once, the tension broke.
"Oh, you were marvellous, Arthur!"
Imogen cried, throwing her head back with a lusty laugh.
"Simply marvellous! And you, Jerry?"
She turned to the man beside her and kissed him.
"You never should have left the stage. You convinced even me."
"My finest performance yet," the erstwhile Penrose said, "for my finest leading lady."
"My Mark Antony," she cooed. "Come, darling, kiss your queen."
They embraced and sank into a violently passionate kiss. The fellow who had assumed the role of Constable Evans turned to me as he steered the car out of town, towards the motorway that led to Southampton. "May I ask you something, Doctor?" I stared at the mirror, unable to take my eyes off my beautiful wife, feeling the pangs I always did when she carried on with one of her lovers. "Wasn't she your patient at the Broadmoor Asylum?" "Yes," I said, fondly recalling our first days together, when I was the only one who'd cared for her, the only one who'd understood. "And you married her?" "The moment I could. I was sacked, naturally, but after the inquiry I didn't waste a minute making her my bride." "So," he gestured to the back seat, "why'd you go along with this?" "Everyone thinks she's been taken away by the police, you see." I turned to him, exceedingly proud of her brilliant plan. "No one will alert the real police. We can sail for Argentina tonight, and—" "I understand that bit," he said, "and you've paid us well enough so it's not no skin off my nose, but don't you mind them carrying on like that, her being your wife and all?" I gazed into the mirror at my beautiful girl, and my heart swelled with love. "I'd do anything for her," I said, because it was true.